Hey, it's Matt, your average gamer, and upon channel request, because a lot of people have asked me how good the Bandit curved swords are, I decided to do a build for it just to explain the differences between that and the Scavenger's curved sword, and also show a bleed build that's relatively easy to get because you can get these very early in the game. I'm going to show you where to get them as well. So these are really good. They do a lot of bleed. They proc bleed technically faster than the Scavenger Curve Sword because they have more bleed on them when you use them in blood, which is what we're going to end up doing. And you use the Scavenger Curve Sword Colt. By the way, I'll leave the Scavenger Curve Sword build in the description below if you want to check that out. But these are more accessible. As I mentioned, you can get them very early in the game. You can start building this extremely early, and you can obliterate most of the bosses. And honestly, being on New Game Plus 7 here again for this video, these were quite good. I didn't run into too many issues. There wasn't a ton of difficulties with this build. It's pretty awesome to use these, and again, very, very easy to get very early in the game. We're going to show you where to get them in a few here. Our entire focus is once again going to be jump attacks because each Bandit curved sword with the arcane we have has around 110 or 112 bleed on it, which is quite good. And each jump attack will hit 4 times, proccing a ton of bleed, and also proccing the successive attack stuff that we're stacking. We'll show the build a little bit later. So we're constantly building up bleed, and we're also constantly building up our damage with the consecutive and successive attack stuff and the jump attacks with the Claw Talisman and the Raptors Black Feathers. Now, if somebody were to ask why are we using these in blood and not a Colt, is unlike the Scavenger Curve Sword, these do not have innate bleed on them. So it won't have bleed that will scale with the B and Arcane for a Colt. You'll lose the bleed in this instance. For the Scavenger Curve Sword, you'll actually get more bleed out of it doing a Colt, obviously, than this because you will have bleed on it, and in this case you will not have bleed on the weapon. So you want to go with blood for that bleed build up and then continue to work on procs, much like the twin blade build where the Scavenger's curved sword is a little bit different. So at the Church of Pilgrimage here, I'm going to show you on the map where it is. This is where you can farm the Bandit curved sword very early in the game. It's around a 2% drop rate, not too bad, not too difficult to grab them very early in the Weeping Peninsula. I also get asked very frequently what to do if you don't have Seppuku. Since Seppuku you don't get until Mountaintops of the Giants, and that is a fairly good amount of time into the game, what can you do until then? Well, if you're stuck to Limgrave, the best thing that I can think of is going to Fort Height here in Limgrave and getting Bloody Slash. But Bloody Slash you can throw on there, get your bleed to scale with Arcane, and start building that bleed build up. That'll eventually turn into a Seppuku bleed build like most bleed builds because Seppuku is just incredibly powerful. It's really awesome, and it makes the most of the jump attacks. All you have to do is kill the knight at Fort Height, which is south of Mistwood, and he's not too tough, even at lower levels, and he will drop Bloody Slash for you. You will get followed if you don't kill a lot of the enemies on the way up. You can use summons, I believe, in the fort, though, so just kill him. That's where it is on the map, and you'll get Bloody Slash very early. Not going to be anywhere of the level of Seppuku, but at least you will have some bleed early on in the game with Bloody Slash. Now, for bosses and field bosses and such, you do have to get the timing down with the jump attacks. It does take a little bit. For me, it was kind of funny on the Scavenger Curved Sword. I kept missing them all the time. It was a very frequent thing. Got a little bit better with it this time around. Was able to proc bleed and do a lot of damage. Again, we're on New Game Plus 7. I think around Journey 12 at this point. Still doing, though, a ton of damage with this build because it builds up bleed very quickly, and it also does a fairly good amount of damage as well. So even testing this on field bosses and such, and I'm going to show you how to throw it on a Colt and do damage to bosses that are immune to bleed here with Radagon and Elden Beast. We're just going to show clips from it. Radagon kind of beat me up a little bit. Took around 2 or 3 tries. He's a little bit of a pain to get the jump attacks on because I'm just one of those people that just misses a lot, so I kind of missed him a lot. In the beginning, you get some free hits. After that, though, you're definitely going to have to, be on him, dodge the attacks and whatnot, and continue to try to do jump attacks. However, even switching to a Colt, losing the bleed, because they're both immune to bleed, so there's no point in going with blood. It actually shredded Elden Beast, and I wanted to show that. Does a lot of damage to him. Don't need to respec for these guys. It's very doable with a Colt, and you can still get a lot of damage out of the weapon. So for Elden Beast, my recommendation for you is just to try to get as many jump attacks in as possible. I know that's the norm, but for this instance, you're going to really want to build up that consecutive attack stuff so you can absolutely shred his HP. And since he's a very large target, it's not very hard to do either. You can do this quite easily simply by jumping on his back or anywhere on him. You're going to hit him with all 4 hits pretty much every single time because he's so large. It's always better to make this fight quick too, and the fact that you can make this fight quick by switching to Occult on the Bandit curved swords means that you don't need to respec for this fight. You really shouldn't have to, as long as you're comfortable with your jump attacks. You switch to Occult, you get that pure damage on the jump attacks, and you build up those consecutive attack bonuses to continue to just have your damage rise with every hit, and you're just going to shred Elden Beast. You're not going to have too much difficulty with them. And once you get towards the end, make sure you make quick work of them, because much like Radagon, do keep in mind Elden Beast gets very spammy at the end, so you're going to want to make fast work of him once he's past that Elden Stars part, so he doesn't keep spamming and kind of ruin the fight for you. Get close to him, have him try to bait his like physical attacks if you can, because they're easier to fight against, they're very easy to dodge, and they're very slow, and then just shred them. So we have 2 Bandit curved swords normally in blood, any seal will do, the White Mass, Raptors Black Feathers, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, Millicent's Prosthesis, Lord of Blood's Exultation, Claw Talisman, and then we have the consecutive attack tier, and then the faith tier for buffs as well. For stats, you want to invest heavily in Dexterity and Arcane. Those are going to be our 2 main stats. Arcane starts to soft cap around 40 and hard cap around 60. So between 40 and 60 is good. And then you're going to want to get to 60 Dex with Millicent's Prosthesis. I'm able to get to 60 from the 55. Our main stats, though, for damage and for blood are going to be Dexterity and Arcane. Those are your 2 stats, and obviously you're going to want a fairly good amount of Vigor as well. For starting class, you definitely want to go Bandit or Samurai. I wasn't on this character, but those would be 2 great starting classes. Now, for the buffs, Golden Vow. I love Blessings Boon for this type of build. We're going to use Flame Grant Me Strength, and then I'm on Xbox, but we're going to go Y and LB, and then Y and RB back to proc Seppuku on both of the swords, so that we can absolutely shred, do a ton of bleed and a ton of damage, and then go right into it, doing a significant amount of jump attacks. Because let's be real here, getting the jump attacks, that's going to be the most amount of damage that you're going to get, much like the Twin Blade setup, and then just any of the bleed setups, the jump attacks is really where it's at. As you can tell by the way here, I wanted to show this real quick what journey I'm on, because people always ask. Yes, we're at the max scaling, and yes, this build still works great at this level. I always throw in a mob control type thing, a gate front. This works well for mobs. There's obviously better weapons than ashes to use to just obliterate mobs. There's a whole bunch of them in the game. But for individual fights and stuff, obviously this shines quite well because you're able to proc bleed. And it's also, by the way, a good place to practice the jump attacks. So if you need to practice your jump attacks, feel free to go to gate front, kind of lure some of the enemies there. You probably don't want too many of them at once, but you could, if you can hit them without their shields, you can get multiple kills at the same time. However, individually, definitely very easy to do with this build, and it's a good place. Gate front is a good place to practice your jump attacks, get in as many hits as you can, proc bleed, and basically have a good time learning the build. So if you're doing that and you're looking for a place to go first, definitely practice there. It's great for it. So field bosses are a great place to test this build. If you want to test a build like this, go out and attack some field bosses. Dragons are great because they're large targets that will bleed. A little bit resistant for a lot of dragons. This one's like weak to everything. Even though he can rot half of Kaled, it's very good to go out into some field bosses that aren't immune to bleed and practice this as well. Do a lot of damage, and you'll find yourself getting used to the jump attacks and being able to proc and hit for a lot of damage, and you're going to end up being really happy with the build if you go with this, because they're very, very, very good. So yeah, if you want to make your life a little easier, definitely practice on some bosses. Obviously, this dragon seriously does some crazy amounts of rot damage. He has that one attack that it really feels like it's just like half of the map of Kaled that just rots when he does that into the ground or whatever. But yeah, practice on some bosses, get your jump attacks in. Field bosses are excellent to practice on as well. So yeah, as we mentioned here, you're going to see me shred again. These are quite good. I do like the Scavenger Curve Sword, as I mentioned, better because they do pure damage, but I know these are a lot more accessible. They're easier to get. You can get them at the beginning of the game. That's really important when you're building stuff, and you can farm 2 of them as well. Again, you know, I'll mention this one last time. If you're going to ask me personally, I think this, in comparison to Scavenger Curve Sword, which I left in the description below, I like the Scavenger Curve Sword because you're getting more pure damage, as mentioned before. But as far as the Bandit Curve Swords, obviously, very easy to get 2 of them, very easy to use Seppuku on them, and the jump attacks still do a lot of damage and still make for a fantastic build. If you're not subbed to this channel, definitely hit that subscribe button. If you love overpowered PvE builds, there's a ton of awesome builds on my channel. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll catch you guys there.